The 7th console generation was a really ambitious time for the use of motion capture technology in video games, and one that really pushed things forward in that regard was 2007's Heavenly Sword by Ninja Theory. All roads point to this being the first game to implement performance capture for its in-game cinematics. That's a term popularized more recently to refer to the process of capturing an actor's face and body movements alongside their vocal delivery simultaneously. Even in 2007, it was common enough to see these different elements used to some degree in a project. But this was the first time it was all captured together, meaning the character you saw on screen was a true reflection of an actor's performance. If you've ever wondered why some games have motion captured characters that just don't seem natural, it could be a result of that disconnect created by recording body movements during separate sessions from when facial movements and voices are. Their body might be played by a separate actor entirely, leaving the actor in the recording booth to imagine and try to recreate what their face might look like in a scene while delivering their lines. Let's just say it's hard to make all of that come together convincingly, because the human mind can recognize irregular behaviors very easily. By capturing everything together, you get a much more believable and synergistic performance. The actors can truly become their characters and play off of each other in an organic way. Of course, these applications are offshoots of the techniques developed for films first, and one of the pioneering moments for motion-captured computer-generated characters was Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, played by Andy Serkis. Over his career, Serkis has brought life to several iconic characters through the use of performance capture, and he brought that expertise with him when he came in to play the role of King Bohan, Heavenly Sword's main villain. Ninja Theory was completely new to the motion capture process, but by taking a creative lead as the game's dramatic director, Serkis was in full control of how these scenes played out and was able to ensure not only that the script worked for the format, but that we got the most compelling performances possible from the actors. Most of them were able to bring a ton of personality to their roles because they had accomplished backgrounds in theater, so they were accustomed to exaggerating their performances to convey their characters' emotions and movements to even the most distant audience members. I think that's something unique about Heavenly Sword's use of motion capture. They all have these intense personalities and distinct mannerisms, really leaning into how much the technology is capable of bringing to a role. They weren't just trying to bring an added layer of believability to a recreation of the world we're familiar with, but use that realism to ground the game so its larger-than-life characters have more of an impact. All of this technology is in service of fully realizing these characters that they wanted to have stick with you. And even though he isn't the main character, King Bohan is the standout role, even among several other great ones. This character has always been a personal favorite of mine, and his presence in the story single-handedly elevates this game in my mind. It opens up to a battlefield with an entire army enclosing in on one woman, who wields a sword nearly as big as her. This is our main character, Nariko, and her sword is the titular Heavenly Sword. Unfortunately, this is the end of her journey, and after she puts up a good fight, she collapses to the ground in pain as strange symbols begin to etch themselves across her skin in a spiral. King Bohan watches the whole thing from above, but before we can get any real context, we follow Nariko's soul up into the clouds before it diverges into a limbo of sorts. Here we see her speaking directly to the spirit of the sword, pleading to go back to defend her people, claiming she isn't ready to die yet. The rest of the game is told in a flashback, beginning 5 days earlier, where Nariko walks us through how we got to this point where all hope seems lost. For months, Nariko and her clan have been pursued by King Bohan, who is on a campaign to expand his empire by conquering the surrounding lands. Due to its beauty and rarity, his current infatuation is with the Heavenly Sword, which Nariko's clan is sworn to protect. And he has unlimited resources at his disposal to hunt them down and take it. This goal is driven by his immense pride and greed, aiming to possess it just so he can have it as a reminder of his dominance and greatness as a leader. Now he has their backs against a wall, and by taking Nariko's father Shen captive, he's able to force Nariko to hand over the sword.
Actually, Shen, they have taught me that everything comes to he who waits, but quicker yet to he who takes.
He comes off as cool and diplomatic, but as soon as he gets any kind of pushback, you see the facade begin to break while he resorts to violence. Personally, even the sound of his voice was nothing like what I expected from him. I thought he'd just be some kind of deep-voiced, powerful warlord, but instead we get this whiny, overly excited, almost manic personality type. You don't know where he's gonna take things, so you're glued to every wild facial expression he makes, trying to figure him out. Instead of complying, Nariko is the one person who would try to wield the sword before giving it up, even against Shen's instructions.
Every lifetime has one moment.
The sword is so revered by her clan because of the legends that have surrounded it for generations. A ton of this backstory is fleshed out in a 5-part animated series that was released in conjunction with the game. They're just a couple minutes long each, but only the first 2 were finished in time to be included on the game's disc itself, while the others were made available over the PlayStation Network. Luckily, they haven't pulled the plug on those servers completely yet, and I was able to retrieve them all for this video in source quality. According to these, there was once a tyrannical leader known as the Raven King who aimed to rule the entire world. After years of bloodshed, people's prayers were answered with a warrior of light who descended from the heavens with a powerful sword and vanquished the evil ruler. But instead of bringing on an age of peace, his sword, which was left behind on Earth, only ended up having its power used by opportunists in further carnage. The nature of the sword began to twist from the constant violence it was being used for, in time feeding on its many wielders until they perished. Eventually, a clan took on the responsibility of relieving humanity of the sword's burden, keeping it safe from those who would use it for battle until the day came that the Warrior of Light would return to reclaim it. This series also details Bohan's upbringing as an entitled prince training alongside Shen, showing that he was rotten even at a young age. We see him bested in hand-to-hand combat, and in order to save his ego, he draws a blade and attempts a sneak attack, which only ends up giving him the scar we see across his eye in the game. We can see he's eager to inherit the throne, trying on his father's crown and being backhanded for his insolence. This earns his father an early grave after Bohan poisons him, and from there, he begins his reign of terror. It was foretold that the Warrior of Light would return as a boy on a specific date, but when that date came, Nariko was born instead, with her mother dying in the process. Her birth was seen as a bad omen, and Shen even debated executing her on the spot. Instead, he decides to raise her into a powerful warrior, all the while she's ostracized from the other members of her clan and considered to be cursed. That's how things continued until Bohan became the latest in a long line of people who wanted possession of the sword. And against everything she'd been taught, Nariko chooses to use the sword's power herself. Using its unique ability to switch between 3 forms, she's able to devastate a good number of the men Bohan has brought with him, which annoys him more and more, not because he cares about their lives, but because she's delaying him from getting what he wants.
Oh, please give it to me, or else I'll kill the old man painfully. And I can be quite inventive.
Get the sword away from him!
Kill her.
She chooses to take a dive to keep the sword out of his possession, so Bohan returns to his domain with the last remnants of her clan imprisoned, waiting for her to launch a rescue attempt. This is where we get a good look at his generals, the unpredictable flying fox, the vitriolic whiptail, and the blundering giant roach. This scene is the best one in the game, since we get to see all of these strong personalities bouncing off of each other to the point where even Bohan loses control of the conversation and it devolves into name-calling.
I am not a fool, say.
It's a matter of opinion, sweetie.
Did something speak? I can smell something fishy.
Bohan's narcissism shines here, beginning with him lost in self-absorption, claiming to be sent from heaven to guide the world to greatness. We also get a glimpse at his paranoia, as the fear of being assassinated by those around him is a constant thought in the back of his head. He likely fears karma catching up with him since he did the same thing to his own father to claim the throne. Flying Fox says he has his protection as long as he's paying the right price, showing that he only has the loyalty of those close to him because he's buying it and not because they believe in his ideals. This is also the first time we get a good look at Bohan's pet raven that he keeps close by and speaks to directly. It can actually be seen watching and keeping tabs on Nariko at several points in the game. While he claims to be conquering all of these lands for their own good when speaking to Shen, we know it's a result of his inflated sense of self-importance. He has no real morality to speak of, driven purely by how he can pleasure himself, whether that be through obtaining more and more physical possessions or satiating his sexual desires. That's how his bastard son Roach came to exist, someone whose large size makes him useful and childlike intellect makes him easy to order around. He wants nothing more than to make his father proud, but if he accidentally reminds Bohan they're related, he gets physically abused, probably because Bohan hated his own father so much. Who knows what kind of neglect or complications during childbirth caused Roach to turn turn out the way he did. Since his mother is never made clear, she could very well be dead, but either way, she was probably just another one of Bohan's flings. While Bohan clearly has a casual sexual relationship with Whiptail, there's nothing to suggest that she's the mother, and she doesn't seem to have much sympathy for him either. Bohan orders the three of them to set a trap for Nariko by hanging Shen out in the open so she'll try to rescue him. She ends up being too late and getting ambushed by Whiptail, but using the powers granted to her by the sword, she's able to bring Shen back from death. It's interesting that the sword can be used to perform miracles like this, yet Bohan just wants to keep it in his personal armory as a symbol of his greatness. After an arduous battle, Nariko ends up impaling the sword straight through Whiptail and passing out in the process. When she awakens, she sees Bohan has come to collect his prize. As he pats himself on the back for a successful plan, he notes that he wouldn't have done the same if it were his father in peril, calling him an old pervert. It's ironic that he would resent him for that behavior when he acts the same way. Maybe he learned that from what he grew up seeing, but the guy clearly has daddy issues no matter what. Whiptail was one of his many lovers, but he has no qualms with putting her out of her misery and moving on to what he really cares about. Shortly after Nariko is captured and imprisoned, Bohan pays her a personal visit, trying to talk her into giving up her quest for justice, because, you guessed it, he wants to bang her. This cock armor tap he does is so creepy yet hilarious to me, and it's just one of many details that shows off the consideration they put into the characters when doing the mocap. Her beauty has been in the back of his mind this whole time, turning her into just another object to conquer and gratify himself with. Nariko only reconfirms her intent to kill Bohan, but feeling he's already won, he has her thrown in the Colosseum so he can celebrate his victory in front of his people. First, he pits her against the captured members of her clan, then sends in even deadlier creatures. And the whole time, Bohan is cackling, loving the fact that he can torment her for refusing to submit and be applauded for it by his citizens. Thankfully, Nariko's friend Kai is able to steal the heavenly sword from Bohan's collection and get it back to her before she's killed. That's when he gives Roach a shot against her, and he only starts getting upset when even his own son starts getting knocked around because now his image is on the line. Even though he disowns him, if his genetics are getting beaten in front of everyone, then that's reflecting negatively on Bohan himself, and he's not having that. He went out on a limb by giving Roach a chance to prove himself, and he failed, throwing his chalice at him once again. But this time, Roach catches it in a moment of defiance, showing he's sick of hurting himself trying to prove himself to his father. And that alone stuns Bohan. Nariko is able to escape with the sword, and Bohan sends Flying Fox after her. They face each other in some forest ruins where he almost kills Kai, but ends up getting an arrow straight through his forehead when he isn't looking. She's able to return to the last remnants of her clan, but was followed by Bohan's raven, who will return to him with word of their location. We get a scene from contrasting perspectives, showing Nariko's clan preparing to defend themselves one last time, and Bohan preaching maniacally to his people, filling their heads with propaganda to motivate them to kill. He's a complete hypocrite as he rants about needing to rid his kingdom of perverts and fanatics. He makes sure to focus on the fact that above everything else, they need to kill Nariko, whose continued resistance toward his dominance, especially sexually, has made her enemy number one. When someone this narcissistic has unlimited resources, being told no is incomprehensible. So if he can't have her, then he'll kill her, even rationalizing it to himself that she's some kind of succubus who wants to get to him.
Waiting for the moment when she can sink her slavering jaws into my sacred genitals!
While he's clearly insane, he might not be far off with that considering how many of Nariko's finishing moves revolve around CBT. It's really creepy how Roach can be seen playing around with the corpses of both Whiptail and Flying Fox. After delivering his grand speech, Bohan sends everything he has at the stronghold where Nariko's clan stands their ground. It's a total war zone, and although Nariko gives it all she has, her time is up, and the sword chooses now to claim her soul, taking us back to the opening of the game. She refuses to die in this critical moment, convincing the spirit of the sword that if it doesn't send her back, that it will never see bloodshed again, only existing to be put on display and admired by Bohan before being forgotten. She returns to her body imbued in light, just like the legendary warrior who originally possessed the sword. She then begins devastating Bohan's army, causing him to fall to his knees in disbelief. He knows he only has one option left, suddenly referring to his raven as my lord and begging for it to give him power. Even when making his case, he still can't help referring to Nariko as beautiful, showing that his obsession with her has overshadowed the sword itself at this point. The raven obliges, turning into black smoke, possessing his body through his mouth and giving him supernatural strength. This moment redefines our understanding of Bohan as a villain. If it isn't clear, this raven is the remaining spirit of the Raven King from the legends who was defeated by the Warrior of Light. This dark entity has been using Bohan as its conduit to continue pursuing world domination, and now it wants the Heavenly Sword out of the hands of anyone who would try to halt its progress. Perhaps after being vanquished, the Raven King can't affect things directly and needs someone to do his bidding. Or maybe this was always how it operated, and even the original Raven King was just another one of his servants who was killed. Bohan is knowingly subservient to this raven and is fully aware of its supernatural abilities, meaning they must share some sort of telepathic link. I'm gonna assume Bohan was always a bad apple and that's why he was chosen, but I wonder how long they've been communicating and how much of the raven's influence turned him into the monster he is today. Now, history is repeating itself as a warrior wielding the Heavenly Sword is facing off against the Raven King's power once again. It's unclear if Bohan is still in control or if he's been completely overtaken by the personality of the Raven King. Now he can fly around the battlefield and shoot blasts of energy from his hands. It makes me wonder if Bohan is actually capable of fighting normally. He stands around with a big axe sometimes, but we never see him use it in combat before being possessed. He tries to get Nariko to doubt herself, asking if she ever considered whether she was fighting on the side of heaven or hell. The morality of the corrupted sword that craves conflict and the Raven King's quest for order through oppression isn't as black and white as the original legend. He then tries to break her down by repeating everything negative people have said about her throughout her life, mentioning how her birth defiled the prophecy and that when she's dead, she'll be forgotten. She doesn't let that get to her, claiming that she isn't doing this to be remembered, and she'll define herself through her actions in this moment. As their battle rages on, they take their fight to purgatory itself, but eventually Nariko delivers the final blow on the battlefield in front of his subjects. The Raven King's power drains from Bohan's body, and he begs for forgiveness for failing. As punishment, his eyes are pecked out one by one, blinding him, and then he's left to rot. Nariko walks over to end his suffering, but Roach arrives just in time to defend him, begging her to let him take Bohan home now that he's been so thoroughly defeated and rendered helpless. This time Bohan is happy to call Roach his son, but I don't buy the sincerity. Personally, I just think he's being manipulative so Roach will get him out of there, but it's possible that the Raven abandoning him really did lift a dark energy from his mind. As her final action, Nariko transfers her remaining energy into Kai to bring her back from critical condition, entrusting her with keeping the sword safe before passing away. So, although he's neutralized, Bohan technically outlives the protagonist, and it'd be interesting to see how he'd return in a sequel if he was included. If a sequel went on to follow an older Kai using the sword and they ever crossed paths, I can imagine him being pretty creepy and conniving even when blinded. Even in this game, he's the embodiment of all bark, no bite. He's charismatic, overconfident, and arrogant, but accomplishes everything through his army of followers and countless possessions. Only after groveling for even more power is he able to stand a chance on his own, and he's still smacked back down. It really feels like Circus was given free rein to find this character's personality and go as wild as he wanted, given his experience level and how involved he was in the development of the story. And thanks to that, we got a one-of-a-kind villain that I'll always remember. Although we didn't get that sequel, Ninja Theory did go on to create what's essentially a spiritual successor in the form of the similarly named Hellblade, which continued to push performance capture technology and its integration in video games just like its predecessor. Most notably by capturing everything alongside eye movements and rendering it in real time as reference for the developers and actors so the performance can be tweaked on the spot. This way, the performer can see themselves in the world and what they're reacting to, instead of just using their imagination. Hellblade is definitely its own entity and stands on its own, but it's fascinating to consider how certain elements might have been inspired by what they would have liked to do with a sequel, especially when they claim that Heavenly Sword was intended to be a trilogy of games. It follows a woman with similar face paint as Kai, wielding a legendary sword and dealing with mental health issues, which is also an element of Kai's character I didn't hit on specifically in this video. Hellblade's cutscene presentation is also heavily borrowed from the purgatory scenes of Heavenly Sword, where Nariko talks directly to the camera. So, the experience they got from developing Heavenly Sword and its DNA can still be felt to this day. And it all began with Andy Serkis lending his distinctive talent and knowledge towards playing the captivating King Bohan. By the way, I was looking through the making of videos that are included with the game, and I noticed this small shot of this green alien looking thing floating through the air. It looks like it's from the final cutscene, but whatever it was cut from the game. I'm gonna assume these are the invisible spirits Kai seems to be seeing throughout the story. And I'm not sure if they were always intended to be invisible or their models were removed to be more mysterious. Either way, I just had to mention it because I've never heard a single person talk about this in my entire life, and I need it documented so I know I'm not insane.